Hello and welcome to the Daily Poem. I'm Heidi White, filling in for David Kern. And today I'm going to read a poem for you from one of my favorite poets. You've actually heard from me before if you're a regular listener. This poet, Edna, St. Vincent Millay. And as we are on December 31st, 2019, the very last day of the year, not only of the year, but of the decade. So I thought that this poem would be appropriate. When the Year Grows Old by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I cannot but remember when the year grows old, October, November, how she disliked the cold. She used to watch the swallows go down across the sky and turn from the window with a little sharp sigh. And often when the brown leaves were brittle on the ground and the wind in the chimney made a melancholy sound, she had a look about her that I wish I could forget, the look of a scared thing sitting in a net. Oh, beautiful at nightfall, the soft, spitting snow, and beautiful the bare boughs rubbing to and fro. But the roaring of the fire and the warmth of fur and the boiling of the kettle were beautiful to her. I cannot but remember when the year grows old, October, November, how she disliked the cold. So I think that the ending of the year for most of us is a profound experience, especially this particular year when we're moving not only from one year to the next, but from one decade to the next. So I wanted to read this poem and point out a couple of little details about it that I think are really lovely. The poem itself uses very simple words. It uses a very regular kind of sing-songy rhythm and rhyme. It almost sounds like a nursery rhyme as I'm reading it. But embedded within this kind of childlike structure that appeals to everybody, the words aren't difficult to understand. It's very easy to follow the rhymes. You kind of find yourself, beating a rhythm along with it, knowing what to expect in terms of the form. But in spite of that, there is just this very profound reflection that compares a woman, the her of the poem. The poem is written from this particular perspective, referring over and over again to her. And the her within the poem is the year itself as it approaches the end, much like an old woman might sit in a cottage in the wintertime approaching the end of her life and reflect and contemplate that season of time in her own life. And so Millay is comparing the year as it approaches its end to an old woman contemplating the end of her life. And the poem is very sensory. I really like that about it. It uses images and comparisons, very sensory ideas to anchor it to the real world. And it moves from cold to warmth. There's a lot of words that indicate wintertime and cold. In this first stanza, it ends with how she disliked the cold. And she's sitting by the window looking out at the brown leaves brittle on the ground, and the wind in the chimney is making a melancholy sound. And so she's tied to this world of nature around her that is cold and that is barren and that is brittle. And of course, that has a very melancholy tone to it. But the poem moves. It takes a turn here. And a lot of Millay's poems do that. It takes a turn around the fifth stanza. And in the middle of the poem, in the fourth stanza, it reaches a very bleak point. She had a look about her that I wish I could forget, the look of a scared thing sitting in a net. And then the very next stanza takes the turn. Oh, beautiful at nightfall, the soft spitting snow, and beautiful the bare boughs rubbing to and fro. So the poem moves from cold to beauty and warmth. It moves from melancholy to hope, from barrenness to life. And this poem is bookended by the same stanza. The first and seventh are mirrors of each other. I cannot but remember when the year grows old, October, November, how she disliked the cold. That's the same stanza, first and last. But because of that turn that the poem takes from barrenness to life, from cold to warmth and melancholy to hope, the seventh stanza has a very different feel to it. Instead of feeling like that's something that's very present in the life of this old woman, this old year, looking back and reflecting, because of the different sensory language that's used in the second half of the poem, the warmth of fur, the boiling of the kettle, the word beautiful that's repeated 3 times at the end. Then that final stanza, which is a mirror of the first, becomes not necessarily a contemplation of the present, like it sounds like at the beginning of the poem, but of the past, as if the year is beginning again, as if the beauty and the warmth that are talked about in those final stanzas make then the experience of dislike being in the past. And I really love that unexpected turn that the poem takes, because it is so human, it's so real. For many of us, I know I can relate to this very much so as I approach the end of this year, the end of this decade. I'm thinking about what's happening next. And instead of feeling cold and barren, I feel expectancy and hope and possibility of the new year. But I think it's very significant for human life, as Edna St. Vincent Millay seems to be reflecting here, that shift to new life happens at the coldest and the darkest, and for some of us, the bleakest and the most exhausting point in the year. And so we might approach this wintertime season, this darkness and depth of winter solstice, as it can either be a time of very bleak darkness, or it can be a time of great expectancy and hope as we begin again, as we start a new year and all of the possibilities that are before us. And Millay seems to hold those two things in tension. For this old woman, this old year, reflecting on the past, she's also looking forward into the possibilities and the hope of the future, and she's holding those things in tension. They are both there. It is both the winter time and the darkness, and it is also the warmth and the beauty. So as we look forward into 2020, a new year, a new decade, I think that Millay has some reflections to offer for us. So here it is again, When the Year Grows Old, by Edna St. Vincent Millay. I cannot but remember when the year grows old, October, November, how she disliked the cold. She used to watch the swallows go down across the sky and turn from the window with a little sharp sigh. And often when the brown leaves were brittle on the ground and the wind in the chimney made a melancholy sound, she had a look about her that I wish I could forget, the look of a scared thing sitting in a net. Oh, beautiful at nightfall, the soft spitting snow, and beautiful the bare boughs rubbing to and fro. But the roaring of the fire and the warmth of fur and the boiling of the kettle were beautiful to her. I cannot but remember when the year grows old, October, November, how she disliked the cold. This has been the Daily Poem. We'll see you next year, next decade, with another poem. Happy New Year.